had Penske continued in Formula One, they would have gone on to win more races and arguably to win a world championship, because that was the quality of the Penske operation. But we never got to find that out. That was the disappointment. We never got to find that out.
August 17th, 1975. In warm-up for the Austrian Grand Prix, American icon Mark Donohue loses control of his March 751 after a tire fails. He careens through a metal Armco barrier and trackside signage and is knocked briefly unconscious in the wreckage. Against all odds, Donohue seems fine and heads back to the garage, where he begins to complain of a worsening headache. He's soon after rushed to a local hospital. Doctors urgent to operate on what has been diagnosed as a brain hemorrhage. It's not enough. 2 days later, on August 19th, Donohue dies, having crashed a Formula One car run by his longtime friend and racing team partner, Roger Penske. August 1976. Roger Penske has hired John Watson to pilot the PC4, the latest machine in the team's lineup. It's a stronger car, faster, more reliable, and on that Sunday afternoon, it's the car that first sees the checkered flag. Exactly 1 year after Mark Donohue's death, John Watson wins Penske's first and only Grand Prix. Several months later, the team folds, and Roger Penske returns to America. For so many motorsport fans here in the United States, Penske's foray into Formula One remains one of the biggest what-ifs of all time, for so many different reasons. What if Mark Donohue hadn't come out of retirement to race and develop his F1 car? What if Donohue had won Penske's first F1 race? What if John Watson had been able to win more events, to entice more sponsors, to give the team more of a reason to continue? What would Formula One look like today with a stronger American presence back in the late 1970s? We won't ever know. But this week, on Deadly Passion's Terrible Joys, we're going to dig into what we do know about Penske Racing in Formula One, Mark Donohue's death, and John Watson's triumph, which remains the most recent Grand Prix win by an American team. Motorsport isn't just about fast cars and daredevil drivers. It's a place where scandals burn hotter than exhaust pipes. This is a history podcast dedicated to delving into the darkest corners of the racing world to uncover secrets, deception, and intrigue. My name is Elizabeth Blackstock, and welcome to Deadly Passion's Terrible Joys. On February 20th, 1937, Roger Cyril Penske was born into an Ohio family that had found success thanks to his father Jay's metal fabrication company. His father instilled loyalty in his employees and encouraged his son to find meaning in hard work, something that Roger Penske has carried on through to this day. He set goals for himself far beyond anything he needed to achieve, and when he inevitably met those goals, he wiped the slate clean and set another one. Penske's entrepreneurial do-anything spirit was in evidence right from the start. As a teenager, he would buy older cars, repair them, and sell them at a profit. After graduating from Shaker Heights High School in 1955, he headed off to Lehigh University, and it was during this period of time that he first started to truly experiment with racing. As a member of the Philadelphia Region Sports Car Club of America arm, Penske honed his craft at Vineland Raceway in New Jersey and at various small hill climbs in the region. And he even had professional aspirations that saw him named Sports Illustrated's SCCA Driver of the Year in 1961. He contested 2 Formula One Grand Prix and was even offered a rookie test at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway ahead of the 500, but his actual aspirations extended far beyond being the one to compete himself. It didn't take long before Penske purchased his first car dealership, where he sold Chevrolets in Philadelphia. Actively racing himself was a risk, and it was also very time-consuming. But he still couldn't quite shake the racing bug, and in the late 1960s, he founded a little organization called Penske Racing. It was a small but dedicated team that consisted of a few trusted engineers and mechanics helmed by Penske's business sense, and it didn't take long before the outfit began to make waves in the American racing world. Part of that ultimately came down to Penske's longtime driver and right-hand man, Mark Donohue. A mere 26 days after Roger Penske entered this world, Haddon Township, New Jersey gained its newest resident, Mark Neary Donohue Jr. Young Donohue was infatuated with automobiles, transforming his family garage into an auto shop and learning to drive when he was just 10 years old, though his forays on four wheels were regularly brought to a halt due to illness. From scarlet fever to polio, requiring a tonsillectomy, an appendectomy, and vein cauterizations all throughout childhood, Donohue was plagued with pain. But you wouldn't know that unless you had known him. If you've ever read his autobiography, The Unfair Advantage, you'll know what I mean. Donohue defined his life by his work on race cars. Anything that went on behind the scenes remained there, far away from the prying public eye. Much like Penske, Donohue was driven by a desire to achieve greater and greater heights. His love of cars and racing was a central part of his years studying for a degree in mechanical engineering at Brown University, and by 1959, he was a regular on the SCCA scene, winning his first national championship behind the wheel of an Elva Courier in 1961. Whereas Roger Penske went off into the business realm, Donohue continued behind the wheel, and a fellow driver named Walt Hangson took Donohue under his wing. Hangson recognized the young driver's talent, even if Donohue himself confessed in his autobiography that he largely had no idea what he was doing. He just did what came naturally. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. But Hangson could see the diamond in the rough. He organized for Donohue to race an MGB at the 1965 Bridgehampton 500-mile endurance race, and the driver from New Jersey won. That was all Hangson needed to see. He invited Donohue to join him behind the wheel of a Ferrari 275 at the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1965. A massive leap in both power and prestige for the young Donohue, but a challenge he vowed to meet head-on. The two men finished the event in 11th place overall, and when Hangson was tragically killed testing a Ford GT40 in 1966, he had spoken so highly of Donohue that there was no other driver Ford could think to call when it came time to head over to the 24 Hours of Le Mans that summer. Hangson's death was an unspeakable tragedy, one that shook Donohue to his core, but one that also offered him a wealth of opportunity. Beyond that drive with Ford, it was at Hangson's funeral that Donohue was approached by Roger Penske. The U.S. racing scene was small, particularly for drivers located on the East Coast, and the two had already met before. But it was at that funeral that Penske came with an offer. He wanted Donohue to drive for him. As Donohue tells it in his autobiography, The Unfair Advantage, his early racing career was composed of a whole lot of pretending to know what he was doing, but nevertheless being offered exceptional opportunities. Penske wanted him. After Le Mans, Ford would ask to retain his services for another year, and that is something that Donohue would agree to. But he couldn't help but wish to see what Penske had to offer. Again, I think it's worth stressing here that despite having experience with the Ford GT program, Donohue was still fairly unknown. He mentions at multiple points in the early part of his autobiography that he seemingly ended up in these prestigious programs by chance and luck, because he'd met someone who obviously liked him as a person. But he was also keenly aware of the fact that the higher-ups in a lot of these programs were hoping for more experienced, higher-profile drivers. For all of his skill, Donohue was still in the early stages of his racing career, and he was still in the midst of a very steep learning curve as he tried to understand exactly how to transform a decent car into a dominant one. So, when he dragged his wrecked Lola T70 back to the Penske pits at Saint-Jevit, Donohue admitted that he fully expected a disappointed Roger Penske to fire him on the spot. "I figured I was going to have to write the whole project off to a bad experience," Donohue wrote. "It was nice while it lasted, Mark, but I'm sorry." Instead, Penske told me to stick around. We would get everything fixed, and we would win the next one at Mosport, near Toronto. That was a very valuable vote of confidence for me at that point. When Donohue crashed again at Watkins Glen, Penske asked if he wanted to keep driving. And when Donohue gave an enthusiastic yes, Penske went off in search for another car. It was a messy start to what would ultimately be a fruitful partnership, and at the end of 1966, Donohue brought his Penske Racing machine home to finish second in the Can-Am Championship. Next came back-to-back U.S. Road Racing Championships, absolute dominance in the Trans Am Series, Rookie of the Year honors at the Indianapolis 500, followed in 1972 by a win at that prestigious race, and a Can-Am Championship. Every good race team is built with two foundational elements: engineering prowess and business sense. Roger Penske brought the business sense. With his car dealerships and ties to prominent brands like Shell and Porsche, he was almost constantly able to find the funding and personnel required to craft an impressive racing program. Donohue mentions that time and time again in The Unfair Advantage. Any time there was some concern about money or timing or future plans, Roger Penske was able to step in with some kind of solution. Donohue, then, was the backbone of the engineering side of Penske Racing. His degree from Brown University gave him a solid background in engineering basics, but his defining features clearly centered on his tenacity and creativity. He and Penske Racing's crew would spend hours every day testing a car on the skid pad, taking it out for lap after lap of various racing circuits, all in an effort to identify and solve issues that were impacting the car's ultimate speed. If you've read The Unfair Advantage, you'll see that displayed time and again. Every single time Penske or Donohue is handed a new car. Every car would go through intensive testing, and Donohue was generally able to pinpoint something about that car that needed improvement, if not multiple things. If he was confused about why a car wasn't responding the way he'd wanted, he would log ever more hours in hopes of making it better. He was foundational for us, Roger Penske reflected in a 2021 interview with Motorsport magazine. He brought an engineering touch to the team and to the cockpit. Mark was special, not just a big lead foot, but a driver who understood the technology, how to make his car better than anybody else's. That's why he won so many races. Up to that point, the driver would turn up with his overalls, his gloves, and his helmet and drive the car, but he wouldn't know how much camber to put in on the right front, what springs to run, and Mark brought all that to the table. But at the end of the 1973 racing season, Donohue announced his retirement. He had won 6 consecutive Can-Am events to take the championship behind the wheel of a Porsche 917-30 that he'd worked so hard to craft. He was convinced to race a Porsche 911 Carrera in the 1973-74 International Race of Champions Series, which he also proceeded to dominate. One of the nicest men in motorsport, fans, drivers, and pundits paid him ample respect as he made the transition from racer to team manager for Penske. In his autobiography, Donohue explains that there were several reasons behind his retirement. Always worried that his success was not due to his driving, but to his engineering skills, Donohue felt that he was past his prime, even if he was still winning 2 titles in his final year of racing. No matter how many people tried to tell him that his performance had leveled off instead of falling off, he worried that he would become one of those guys who kept racing it out to the bitter end, completely unaware that their best days were long gone. He also said that he felt overextended. As you get older, something happens, he wrote in the epilogue of The Unfair Advantage. I don't know whether you become less durable or you become wiser and less willing to put up with the pressure, but I'm sure I can't push myself as hard as I did 5 years ago. If it was just a matter of getting in the car and driving, it would have been easier, but all the outside hassles wore me down. When I ran out of energy, I had to keep going anyhow because race dates can't be put off or rescheduled a few weeks. Then about the time I would think I had everything in hand, along would come a new car or a new guy who showed a lot of talent, and I'd have to work harder to be competitive. See, Donohue was never just racing. He was also putting in hours and hours back at Penske Racing shop in Pennsylvania. He tested cars, prepped them for races, and experimented with his unfair advantages day after day for hours at a time. All throughout his autobiography, he writes about the tenacity required to find solutions to stubborn problems. Sometimes it could take months before anyone figured out a way to solve one specific problem, and that was exhausting. All the enthusiasm and drive and interest that's needed to go through the same problems in car after car after car was gone, Donohue explained. You can only do that for so long. I found I was almost hating it. With all of those complex emotions in hand, Donohue decided to take Dan Gurney to dinner. His fellow American racing legend had also retired from competition, instead taking on a role as a team owner. It was there that Donohue realized he and Gurney had reached a similar mental plane, that for as much as they both still deeply enjoyed the act of racing, they both knew that if they couldn't dominate, they would be miserable. Again, worried that he was past his prime, Donohue made the call to hang up his helmet. Roger Penske offered to hire Donohue as president and general manager of Penske Racing. It was a role that Donohue had been playing even while he was actively competing, and he accepted the offer after taking some time to think about it. But that wasn't easy. I had to face up to a new emotion that many retired drivers have to cope with, he explained. It was the mental anguish at not being able to get back in the car when necessary, to find out what was really happening out there. I had to listen to drivers complain about what the car wasn't doing right, when I was sure that I could take it out as it was and go a few seconds faster. But Mark Donohue was determined to make his retirement work. At least, until he received an offer he simply couldn't refuse. Mark Donohue wasn't the kind of man to flaunt his private life. In his autobiography, The Unfair Advantage, he includes nothing of his tumultuous, illness-ridden childhood, nor does he dive into the family he developed with his first wife and then his second. Those details only come from others. American racing icon Sam Posey offered a unique insight into that post-retirement Donohue in a Motorsport magazine article from 1998. Without racing to occupy him, Donohue bought a boat and a bachelor pad, then fell in love with an Atlanta socialite named Eden who he met while in a local hospital. Now their lives pointed beyond racing, Posey wrote, except Mark could not fully envisage what that life could be. He was not easing gracefully into the role of team manager, nor did his salary, about a third of what he had earned while driving, seem adequate. Drivers need time to get over racing, to find that another life can be fulfilling. Mark never gave himself the chance. Donohue's retirement had not even lasted a full year when Roger Penske came calling. Penske had entered a handful of Formula One races previously, but this time he was forming a proper Formula One team, and he wanted Mark Donohue to be its driver in the full-time competition. Would he be interested in coming out of retirement? The answer, clearly, was yes. Problem was, Mark had retired too early, said fellow racer Mario Andretti. He was only 36, and it wasn't out of his system. At that time, I said he'd never be happy with himself. On the other hand, he then broke to me what is the golden rule: never come back. Mark Donohue agreed to once again climb behind the wheel for the final two Grand Prix of 1974. Over the winter, he married girlfriend Eden and had a honeymoon in Jamaica. And then, come 1975, he would join the Formula One field for a full season as a 38-year-old rookie. The goal? To bring Penske its first Grand Prix victory and perhaps its first world championship, using the same principles of investigation and analysis that had previously netted the duo success in so many other categories. If Roger Penske was going Formula One racing, Mark Donohue wanted to be his driver. The two had had a spin in Formula One previously, when Penske rented out a McLaren M19 for Donohue to race at Mosport and Watkins Glen. The first outing was fantastic. Donohue qualified 8th and went on to finish the race in 3rd place, just behind Jackie Stewart and Ronnie Peterson. But rather than treat it as an opportunity to gloat, Donohue's reflection was characteristically humble. I was probably lucky it rained, he said. In the dry, I might have been nowhere. Still, Formula One represented the final horizon that the Penske-Donohue duo had yet to conquer. The odds were against them, competing in an unfamiliar series on a set of unfamiliar racetracks in an unfamiliar atmosphere. But that was probably also part of the appeal. The Penske Racing organization itself was extremely small, with just a handful of employees. In 1973, Roger Penske purchased a UK-based race car manufacturer called McRae Cars Limited and determined that it was there where he would build his Formula One machines. He asked his Can-Am team manager Heinz Hofer to serve as F1 team manager and Jeff Ferris to serve as chief engineer and designer. Karl Kienhofer served as chief mechanic and engine builder, and Donohue would drive the car that they created called the Penske PC-1. In Motorsport magazine, the PC-1 was described as smart in turnout but conservative in its approach, with coil-sprung suspension and outboard disc brakes at the front. The writer notes that the PC-1 went through heaps of testing at Penske's personal racetracks before it made its debut in the final two races of the 1974 season in Canada and the United States. Those events in 1974 were a little bit of a misery for Donohue and Penske. In the first race, Donohue finished 12th. In the second, he retired. Penske determined to solve its issues over the winter before the start of 1957, though it was coming into the sport against some significant odds, which included a very negative attitude from the British racing press. As Dennis Jenkinson wrote, "When I refer to these as American teams, a friend of mine in California gives a hollow laugh, for the only things American about them are the dollars that are paying for it and the drivers. Both of today's USA-inspired teams use Cosworth V8 engines and Hewland gearboxes, and don't try to tell me that a Cosworth DFE is in reality a Ford engine and that Ford is American, so therefore the Cosworth V8 is an American engine, for I just will not believe it. Just as I will not believe that a Lotus 72 is a John Player special. The Penske car has a long and complicated name, which is that of its major financial backer, but the name is too long to get on a badge, almost too long to get on the side of the car, and certainly too long to put in any historical table of results, always assuming it gets results." Those results were indeed hard to come by. In the first 9 races of the 15-event 1975 championship, Donohue suffered from 4 retirements. Though he was able to place in the top 10 4 other times, only one of those finishes, a 5th place in Sweden, was worthy of points, because at that time F1 only awarded points to the top 6 finishers. After another retirement in France, the team made the decision to scrap the problematic PC-1 and instead modify a March 751 chassis to look something like the team's original car. Onlookers described the PC-1 as being beautiful, but looking unwieldy and erratic. The hope was that the more well-understood March would provide a more stable, reliable ride. The team was rewarded the first time out with a season-equaling best finish of 5th at the British Grand Prix. But in Germany, it was another retirement where Donohue suffered from multiple tire failures. One of the most perplexing parts of Penske Racing's foray into Formula One is how little we know about it. While Donohue shared all of the nitty-gritty details of his development of other Penske racing machines in his autobiography, that book came to an end just before his return to racing in Formula One. We don't know what kind of testing Donohue was doing, what was wrong with the PC-1, and we don't know much about the decision to swap to March or what Penske Racing did to make it their own. But we do know that the 1975 German Grand Prix was the last race Donohue would ever contest. Two weeks after the German Grand Prix of 1975, the Formula One circuit wound its way through the mountains to the Österreichring, located in the tiny town of Spielberg, Austria, and it was looking to be another weekend to forget for Mark Donohue and his Penske Racing team. He had only managed to qualify 21st of 29 cars on the grid, over 3 seconds slower than pole sitter Niki Lauda. Sunday morning dawned dismal and gray, with storms threatening to sweep through just in time for the start of the race. That morning, there was a brief warm-up session that drivers could take advantage of in order to hone their cars for the race's conditions. It was during that session that Donohue's Penske March 751 suffered a tire failure at the Vost-Hügel turn. It was a quick right-hander, and Donohue likely would have been driving flat out or close to it when his tire went flat. The march barreled through 4 rows of catch fencing, over an Armco barrier, and through several promotional billboards. One marshal was killed and another was seriously injured. The car was completely destroyed, but amazingly, Donohue was able to walk out of the medical center. After being briefly knocked unconscious behind the wheel, Donohue had received help from 3 fellow drivers, Emerson Fittipaldi, Bob Evans, and Hans-Joachim Stuck, who pulled him from the car and removed his helmet and balaclava to allow a paramedic to treat him trackside. But he came to at the scene and had a lucid conversation with the drivers who had rescued him, and then it was off to the medical center for further checkups. Aside from some bruises and body aches, Donohue was deemed to be in perfect health. He returned to the pits to give the team a debrief of what happened. The left front tire blew as he was racing along at around 160 miles per hour. Donohue wasn't quite sure why. But as the day progressed, he began to complain of a headache that seemed to be getting worse. It was probably assumed that it was the impact of the crash finally catching up to him and the adrenaline wearing off, but there still didn't seem to be much to worry about. Then Donohue started to convulse. He was rushed from the track to a hospital in Graz, where Dr. Fritz Heppner, a professor of neurosurgery, took Donohue directly into the surgical theater for a 3-hour operation for what was quickly determined to be a brain hemorrhage. Dr. Heppner removed a blood clot, but when his surgery was over, the driver who went under the knife didn't wake up. For 2 days, Donohue held on with help from various machines. It was long enough to allow his wife Eden and his father to arrive in Austria. They were sitting at his bedside along with Roger Penske when Donohue drew his last breath on August 19th, 1975. "This is a great personal shock to me," Roger Penske was quoted as saying in the AP. Sam Posey, a friend and colleague of Donohue's, was hit hard by the death of his compatriot. "My wife-to-be Ellen and I were watching TV at her apartment in Los Angeles when we heard the news," he wrote in Motorsport magazine back in 1998. "In those years, a lot of the drivers we knew had been killed, but I always found ways to rationalize it and keep going. This was different. I knew Mark was better than I was, and smarter, luckier even. If it could happen to him, it could happen to me. I couldn't escape that logic. I turned to Ellen, and she looked at me and said, 'You're going to quit, aren't you?' And I did quit. I continued racing saloons, but I stopped driving open-wheelers. The light at the end of the tunnel had gone out." To call Donohue's death a tragedy would be an understatement. Friends shared memories of him, noting his kindness, intelligence, and warmth. They spoke fondly of his seemingly innate ability to pinpoint issues with the car and his willingness to share feedback with younger, less experienced racers. While Donohue had had bad accidents in the past, the very nature of his fatal wreck seemed uniquely cruel. That he had first been able to walk away, only to die soon after. It was hard to know where to start rebuilding lives and teams without him. In an interview with the Atlanta Constitution in the immediate aftermath of her new husband's death, Eden Donohue stated, "I don't want anyone to ask me why he returned to racing. That is what Mark wanted. That is what made him happy." But several months later, in February of 1976, a lawsuit emerged against Goodyear tires and Bell helmets, alleging that both companies played a role in Donohue's death. The suit was filed by David Lawton, executor of Donohue's estate, on behalf of widow Eden, and according to attorney Leonard Dieckhoff, the goal was to pursue $20 million in damages based on the former driver's lost potential earnings. The suit alleged that Goodyear's tires had failed to withstand, quote, "reasonably foreseeable stress and strain conditions while racing at high speeds," of failing to test, examine, and inspect the tires for potential flaws, and of failing to warn Donohue and Penske Racing of any potential danger with the tires in question. It was also claimed that Bell helmets failed to adequately and properly guard Donohue from serious injury, and it named Roger Penske as having failed to provide the proper parts for the car he was driving. "There will be a lot of proof presented with reference to the claims," Dieckhoff stated. "We intend to show that the tire blew out on its own, not because of negligence on Donohue's part. will be presenting expert testimony to show that. To represent them and offer greater context in court, Goodyear and Penske brought in drivers like Mario Andretti, AJ Foyt, Jackie Stewart, Emerson Fittipaldi, Niki Lauda, and Dan Gurney, likely with the intention of testifying that major accidents like Donohue's are tragic but not uncommon in the world of racing. The prosecution brought in mangled remains of Donohue's tire for jury consideration when it finally hit the courts in 1984. But the judge made a critical decision. He refused to allow any testimony or evidence that was not directly related to the remains of Donohue's car. The trial itself took 7 weeks, during which time those previously mentioned racers shared their experiences. Dan Gurney testified that he'd investigated the remains of the tire and felt that it had been cut by, quote, some sort of debris at the track. Niki Lauda testified that in investigating the crash site immediately after the wreck, he spotted one large piece of tire and other smaller pieces of tire in the location where Donohue crashed through the guardrails. He claimed that any bubbling seen in the tire was, quote, no problem to racers. The tire degradation of that sort was normal and expected. After deliberation, a superior court jury found that Goodyear was indeed liable in Donohue's death. It claimed that the crash occurred because the left front tire of Donohue's race car was defectively manufactured. Goodyear was tasked with paying a whopping $9.6 million to the Donohue family, the largest reward ever returned in Rhode Island State Court at the time. The jury stated that it had arrived at that specific figure by assuming how much money Mark Donohue would have earned in the rest of his life had he lived. Donohue's widow, Eden, was to split that sum with Donohue's 2 children from his first marriage. Mario Andretti was one of the drivers forbidden from offering his perspective on why the tire failed, as the judge claimed Goodyear had failed to establish Mario as a tire expert. In speaking to the media after the ruling, he stated, I'm so mad I can't even think straight. The truth was not brought out here. Goodyear didn't have a chance from the beginning because the judge made up his mind that we couldn't talk about anything that was pertinent to the case. The truth and the fact is that the tire didn't blow out because it was faulty. It blew out because of debris on the track. Further, a man named Burge Hewlett, who was a good friend of Donohue's and who had testified for Goodyear, added, there's not a shred of doubt in my mind. This has done tremendous damage to Mark's reputation and to racing in general. Goodyear initially appealed the ruling, but ultimately withdrew that appeal in April of 1986, 2 years after the initial ruling was decided. The $9.6 million sum it paid out would be the equivalent of $28 million today. For its own part, Bell Helmets decided to settle with the Donohue family out of court for $75,000. Penske Racing, which had been mentioned in the initial suit, was ultimately not required to defend itself in court. Between the death of one of his closest confidants and the ongoing lawsuits attempting to fix blame on someone or something, no one would have been particularly shocked if Roger Penske had decided that he was done with the racing game, at least as far as Formula One was concerned. While he wasn't always immediately successful in another series, there was something particularly draining about committing to an international competition and trying to master this brand new world. But that's not what Penske did. Instead, he vowed that his Formula One team would continue. Penske Racing still had a mission to accomplish. Mark Donohue had died in Austria, the 12th race of a 14-event calendar. Penske stayed away from the next event, the Italian Grand Prix, but hoped to return to the paddock for the season finale at Watkins Glen. Roger Penske wanted to continue competing in Formula One, and he had just the driver in mind to do it. John Watson, who was then racing with Surtees. I had the pleasure of speaking to John Watson about his experience with Penske, so I'll let him tell you just how that invitation to compete came to be.
In 1974, Roger entered Formula One, a single car entry, Mark Donohue, and they only did a few of the races towards the end of the season. And then in 75, they set off on a full World Championship challenge. And throughout being in the paddock, and in those days, the paddock was a more open, friendly place than it is today. So you'd walk around and you'd talk to other teams, competitors, and form friendships, relationships. And one of those was with Penske's team. At the time, the team was run by a guy called Heinz Hofer, who was Swiss, had been a ski instructor, and had met Roger on a ski holiday years earlier. And Heinz was a really lovely, lovely guy, Superman. And I think maybe clicked in terms of friendship and just enjoying each other's company, whichever. Mm-hmm. And I think Heinz maybe said to me at some point in the middle of 75, he said, John, what are your plans for the future? I said, well, Heinz, I don't know. He said, well, look, keep us in mind. If there's any change coming up, please let us know. We'd like to, So it went along that sort of very easy, open-wheeling kind of discussion. Mm-hmm. And then sadly, in the Austrian Grand Prix of that year, Mark Donohue had gone off, I think it was a Sunday morning in warm-up. He had a tire failure from memory. Mm-hmm. And he tragically passed away. Mm-hmm. And very shortly thereafter, communications with Roger and the Penske team opened up, and the team I was driving for at that time had not competed in all the Grand Prix, and they weren't going to be doing the final races in America. So I was asked, would I like to join the team? Would I be happy to become a member of the Penske operation? Mm-hmm. And I was delighted to be able to accept, because I felt that it was a step forward. I think that by reputation, what Roger was doing in motor racing was always considered to be first class.
Yeah.
The team, the quality of the people, the whole Penske operation, as it is today, mm-hmm. was run at an extremely high level, a very professional level, mm-hmm. A big commitment. So for me, it was an opportunity which I felt there's no way I can turn this down, and I was delighted to be able to do so, take up the opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I think the first race I did with Roger's team was in Watkins Glen, the USA Grand Prix. Mm-hmm. And the car I was going to drive was going to be their version, if you like, of the car that they had been running, which was a March 751. So they made you might call it a facsimile of that car, and that became the Penske PC3. Mm-hmm. And that was the introduction to my association with Roger and the Penske team.
Hailing from Northern Ireland, Watson had only been competing in F1 for a little under 2 years at that point, bouncing between a handful of different outfits before he was approached by Penske. And the American team instantly set the standard for what he would go on to consider to be a professional racing organization in the future.
My first season in Formula One was 1974, my first full season, and I was driving for a small private team, mm-hmm. which was based in London, and they ran a single entry for me, which was a Brabham. Mm-hmm. Then in 1975, I drove for John Surtees, at which time, again, it was a small one-car entry. So this was not any different to anything that I'd had, previously. Mm-hmm. I think the difference was that the Penske team brought with it the element of what has been almost synonymous with the Penske motor racing legacy, mm-hmm. which is a very high level of professionalism, a very high level of presentation, everything is done to an extremely high level.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this was a step upwards, a step forward. And again, it was a single car entry. And at that time, that was something that was accessible in Formula One. It's not today.
Yeah.
But certainly single car entries were not unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And I was delighted to be able to be a part of a team working with a small group of people, which is what I'd done with my previous two experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference was that I think what Roger's team was trying to achieve was, again, at a level above the previous two experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were a factory team, but because of Roger, really, and because of his vision, his expectation.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going into a team that's there to make up the numbers.
Yeah.
You're going into a team that is there to achieve and to try and win races.
Speaking with Watson was fascinating because he opened up on what it was like to race for an American team and what he felt he could bring to Penske Racing as a driver from the European Series.
I think the biggest difference that Roger and the team experienced with me
Mm-hmm.
was I was a European driver.
Yeah.
And if you wish, the conventions of racing in America in the various championships that were held there,
Yeah.
as opposed to, let's say, Formula One in my day was probably very much more a European-based championship.
Yeah.
It's changed obviously now, but in the 70s it was certainly very much European-based. And I think that there was a philosophical difference
Mm-hmm.
in the approach of European drivers to Formula One than maybe, and it would have come down to partly cultural.
Yeah.
Even stupid things such as quality of life or lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because remember, in the 70s, America, your society was a million miles ahead of the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The affluence, for example. I mean, first time I went to America was 1973.
Yeah.
I'd never seen a McDonald's or a Burger King or shopping malls. All that was like, hold on, what's this all about? I've never seen this before.
Yeah. A big culture shock.
Absolutely. So what I would have brought to Penske would have been a European approach to life, or European approach to racing.
Mm-hmm.
And that unquestionably was a different approach in race to how Roger and Mark would have gone racing.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally in Europe.
Yes.
I mean Roger in that era had raced at Le Mans as a driver, and he had entered a team at Le Mans, I think, in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger still wants to win Le Mans. It's the one race he still wants to win.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably, until he wins Le Mans, he will never feel that he's fulfilled his ambition of a Penske car and driver standing on the winner's podium.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have brought a European perspective, and that was different, and it was probably something that the team needed.
Yeah.
Because up until that point, the team had been very much an American philosophy, and all Mark's expertise, experience, ability, whatever, was very much USA based. And I mean, Mark was an outstanding race driver, whatever you put him in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you take him out of America and you put him into somewhere down on the south coast of England in a little place called Poole. Particularly at this time, it was a worlds apart.
Yeah, exactly.
And it takes time to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the functions and the things in life that you take for granted in the 70s, living in Reading, Pennsylvania, where the team was based, or I don't know, I think Mark lived in Reading, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But if you imagine, going to big cities in America like New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami.
Yeah.
The first time I went to America, I flew into Miami to go to Daytona Beach. My chin hit the ground. I was like, I can't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the differences between America at that time and the rest of the world was enormous. It was just enormous. And I think, for Mark coming over to Europe, and some of the team members came from America, but mostly the actual team members were comprised of people that were European based. So the culture of the team, while it might have been ostensibly American in that that's the name above the door, and here's the principal, the team owner, gradually the culture within the team would have become more Europeanized, and I would have been a part of that culture.
Penske Racing put its head down, determined to develop a brand new car for the 1976 season, which it would contest from start to finish with John Watson as lead driver. The year kicked off with a brand new car called the PC3, which was modeled after the PC1 and the March 751 that had preceded it. The PC3 made its debut at Watkins Glen in 1975, though a mechanical failure prevented it from taking the grid. But the issues were ideally somewhat ironed out for the start of 76. I say somewhat because a fuel system failure turned into a fire that wiped out the PC3 at the season opener, the Brazilian Grand Prix. John Watson was able to score some points by finishing 5th in South Africa, but he finished so many laps in arrear of the leaders at Long Beach that he wasn't even classified in the final standings. A retirement in Spain was followed by 2 top 10s that were nevertheless outside of the points in Belgium and Monaco. Penske Racing therefore announced that it would introduce a new machine, the PC4, for the Swedish Grand Prix. This updated machine had a low monocoque tub with hip radiators, and after retiring from Sweden, its wheelbase was extended, its aerodynamics were changed, and suddenly, the car was transformed. In the French and British Grand Prix, Watson took the first podiums of his career with back-to-back third places. For Watson, the PC4 was a revelation.
Well, the PC3 was in a sense a facsimile of the March 751, which is what in 75. The original, the Penske PC1, Mark Donohue maybe wasn't getting the level of competition that he had wanted. And the March that year was a very quick car, and Roger, again, I use the word pragmatic, decided, let's buy a March, let's get more competitive. We've got big responsibilities to our sponsors, to our investors. So if we're not doing well with our own car, let's get something that's going to lift us up through the levels of competitiveness. So in end of 75 into 76, there was a regulation change, which I felt had a detrimental effect on the PC3. So then Roger, again using this word pragmatic, went to the team and to Jeff Ferris, who was the engineer designer, and said, Jeff, I want you to make me a new car, which became the Penske PC4. And that car appeared in the middle of the season. And initially it wasn't particularly competitive, but after a few little adjustments and changes, I think the car was just ultimately a better car in every sense, in terms of the car, the level of grip, the level of balance of the car, drivability, consistency, all the things that you need in a race car to start being more competitive and ultimately to start winning races. PC4 became a very good car, a very competitive car from about July onwards until the end of the season.
Though it was another pointsless finish in Germany, Penske Racing nevertheless felt confident in the machine that it had created, and it headed into the Austrian Grand Prix with a certain sense of trepidation mixed with expectation. The Österreich-Ring was, after all, the place where previous driver Mark Donohue had sustained his fatal injuries, and the race itself would be taking place on the first anniversary of Donohue's death. But the Penske PC4 was strong, capable, and John Watson was behind its wheel when that car took the checkered flag in first position. I'll let Watson talk you through just what that win meant to him.
I mean, it was a funny day because it was, well, first of all, we were quite competitive in qualifying. I think we were on the front row of the grid, if I remember. And the day started, it had rained, and the track was part wet, part dry. So very difficult conditions. And there were about 4 or 5 cars in a leading group of cars, and the lead was swapping and changing all the way through. But finally, maybe after about 15 or so laps, race settled down into a pattern, and with me leading the race. And from that point forward, I was able to control my pace, and I was sufficiently fast to remain ahead of the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And the car was a perfect car throughout that race. I mean, it did all that I would want a car to do. The car was competitive, it was consistent, and I was able to drive it in a way which I like to drive a car. And I mean, you wonder, why do you win races? And actually, winning a race is, in some respects, the easiest part of being a racing driver. But it's getting to the level of being able to win a race.
Yeah.
It's finding that level rather than just simply winning it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the evolution of the car. It was a combination on that day of the car. Tires, believe it or not, tires even in those days played a part. Engineering in the car, I did a very good job. Remember, there were no pit stops, nothing of that nature in Formula One at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So once the race began, the control of the race was very much more in the hands of the driver than it is today. And you start the race, you would have a full tank of fuel, one set of tires, and you had to then sort of modulate
mm-hmm.
your driving to ensure that you didn't overwork the tires. In other words, maybe push too hard too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a different style of racing, a different sort of philosophy as a racing driver.
Mm-hmm.
That's how do you get the best out of your car and maintain a level of performance from the start all the way through until the finish.
And what did that win mean to you? I can only imagine.
Meant everything. I mean, on a personal level, it was the fulfillment of a childhood dream. I come from Northern Ireland, which is a small part of the United Kingdom, and I had a childhood dream. And coming from Northern Ireland, there wasn't a huge legacy of professional Formula One racing drivers.
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself to be a pathfinder,
mm-hmm.
and to actually fulfill that dream and stand on the podium as the winner of a Grand Prix with a garland around your neck. And Sterling Moss, I think, was conducting the interviews.
Oh man!
It was just it was a surreal moment, and it's one that is one of the pivotal points of any racing driver's life. The first time you win a race, win a Grand Prix. There are lots of things in life that we have memories of for the first time. The first time you kissed a man, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? Do you remember it?
I do.
Well, there you are. Okay. It's the same thing, in a sense. It's a memory which is indelible. And whatever else you might achieve in your life, it remains indelible.
But for all of the celebration and all of the joy, Watson was keenly aware of what he referred to as a sense of irony. What did it mean to the team? I'm sure heading back to celebrate with everyone must have been incredible.
Well, I think there was a sense of irony almost.
Yeah.
Because precisely 1 year ago, Roger and the Penske team had lost the driver who was synonymous with Roger's racing over many, many years in IndyCar, in Can-Am, in Trans Am,
mm-hmm.
whatever. Roger and Mark were two people joined at the hip. And it was one of those partnerships which, you can think of other wonderful partnerships like Jim Clark and Colin Chapman, and Jackie Stewart and Ken Tyrrell, Niki Lauda and Ferrari. So you have these amazing partnerships. And when all of a sudden, that partnership is broken, as it was with Mark and Roger a year in 1975. Then we come back to Austria. Okay, I was not a part of the team when that tragedy occurred, but I know that Roger and Heinz and team members must have had a sense of foreboding when they turned up in Austria, because all of a sudden, while they might compartmentalize all their emotions, which is what you have to do, frankly, they are human beings after all, and maybe in moments of privacy or whatever, they might have had reflection and thought about a year ago, our driver died as a consequence of an accident. And while it wasn't the fault of the team, it was an incident that occurred. And but look, we're only human. We're only human. So I think that there's a lot of reflection from the team. But as I mentioned likewise and earlier, motorsport is a business. It's not just about let's go racing for fun at weekends. It's about, it's hard-nosed, professional. This is the real deal. This is the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everybody performed at the highest professional level that would be expected of Roger's team. And I say, ironically, we walked out of that race the winners of the Austrian Grand Prix. And honestly, I mean, even now I think about it, it's the irony.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Why did it happen? Are there forces beyond what we understand or can communicate about or with? Why would we have left Austria in 75 after such a terrible outcome, and then 1 year later walk out of Austria the winners?
Yeah.
How do you rationalize that?
Penske Racing was not able to achieve that winning feat again in the season, though its victory in Austria would set the team up for a well-earned fifth-place finish in the World Constructors' Championship that even 2 retirements, 2 points-free finishes, and 1 sixth place at Watkins Glen couldn't shake. The team had made up major ground. But at the end of 1976, the team made a critical decision. Penske Racing would withdraw from Formula One. It wasn't a personal decision or one to do with performance. Rather, in a motorsport magazine interview, Roger Penske stated, "It wasn't to do with the racing. It was a commercial decision based on the few benefits of us doing Formula One. We were the last American team to win a Grand Prix with John Watson in Austria in '76, but look, we could have gone back to do it, but there are only so many hours in a day. I'm a hands-on guy, and I wanted to do what's best for the company, and that's to focus on racing in the US. So that's what we did. Formula One doesn't have so much to offer us commercially for an American team. I mean, racing in the US, we can get customers and employees to California, to Florida, all over, and we cannot get that benefit from Formula One." Watson and I also spoke about the team folding and what happened next.
Motor racing was his passion, but also it was a tool for Roger to, if you like, to showcase his acumen in other areas. So he used Formula One, Can-Am, IndyCar, Trans Am, whatever, to present a car in a way which probably nobody had ever previously done. And presentation of his cars was a very, very major part of the whole Penske philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, it's still the same. So the motor racing was, at the one hand, Roger was a very good driver. Make no mistake, Roger was an excellent race driver. But he again used pragmatism, and he started this business career, and he was an exceptionally good networker. And motor racing was a part of his networking, if you like, plan to grow his commercial business empire. And at the end of '76, he had to make some decisions because he was racing in IndyCar, racing in Can-Am, racing in Formula One. And he couldn't, if you like, handle all 3 or 4 racing programs, and at the same time, what he was doing in the growth of his business empire. And also, he just recently remarried. He met a lovely lady called Kathy, and they'd gotten married a year or 2 earlier. And there's only, I mean, Roger is a Superman.
Yeah.
Even to this day, I don't know anybody who has got the ability, the energy to, if you like, to have a role in all his involvements, his investments, his business, his sporting side.
And how did that that professionalism, did that inform the way you approached Formula One throughout your career after the team?
I think there was maybe elements of that. I don't know whether there was anything that carried forward, because when Roger then stopped his commitment in Formula One at the end of '76, I was able to find another team. It was rather late in the day, but I found another team. By which time, again, Formula One is beginning to evolve. It's becoming a more, I would say, professional sport at every level.
Yeah.
And I went from Roger's team into the Brabham team, which is owned by Bernie Ecclestone. And again, I was familiar with some of the people that were in that team. And people like Bernie Ecclestone and Roger Penske, and even someone like Ron Dennis, are extremely high achievers. These are people, these are not your normal everyday run-of-the-mill people. These are highly motivated, highly driven, high achievers. Mm-hmm. And their objectives they're not there to say make up numbers, they're there to go out and win races or win championships, whichever. So they move at the end of '76 into Brabham was almost as an extension of what I'd enjoyed at Penske. So it was a disappointment, I have to say, because I felt that Roger, I know the reasons why he decided to stop, and I know that I was disappointed, and I know he was probably even more disappointed, but again, it was a pragmatic judgment on his part. But I know that had Penske continued in Formula One, they would have gone on to win more races and arguably to win a world championship, because that was the quality of the Penske operation. But we never got to find that out. That was the disappointment. We never got to find that out.
Penske sold its remaining chassis to ATS Racing and Interscope Racing. The team returned to the United States, and in 1977, the former Penske team manager, Heinz Hofer, was killed in a road accident, leaving dinner with John Watson. Watson's win, to this day, remains the last for an American team in Formula One. Does it mean anything to you that you are still the last man to win a race for an American F1 team?
I wish it was more widely acknowledged.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a very important statistic that, Formula One in America is right now very, very popular. There are two things that are lacking. One is an American team, which is being addressed by Cadillac, and the other is an American Formula One driver, but a driver of the level of the current best in Formula One. And if you think back to the last American world champion was Mario in 1978.
Yeah.
Or back to the first American world champion, Phil Hill, in 1961. Phil Hill won that world championship at Monza in '61, largely because of an accident that occurred between Phil Hill's teammate Wolfgang von Trips, and he had an accident with Jim Clark, and tragically von Trips died. Had that accident not occurred, maybe Phil Hill would not have been American world champion. I don't know. That's conjecture on my side.
Yeah.
Mario Andretti won his world championship in 1978. His teammate at that time was a wonderful, wonderful competitor, a great friend of mine, Ronnie Peterson, and he was a wonderful friend of Mario's as well. And Ronnie joined Lotus rejoined Lotus in 1978, and he had to accept a role in that team, which was number 2 driver to Mario, which he did do, and he honored that obligation all the way through. But many people suggest that Ronnie was actually quicker of the 2 drivers, but Mario was the incumbent driver, and Mario was an exceptionally good driver, a very clever, intelligent man in a race car. Not just a quick guy, but lots of other good qualities. So sometimes ironies come into play in terms of how do these things all unfold?
I can think of few bigger what-ifs in motorsport than Penske Racing's failed foray into F1. What if Roger Penske had decided against competing in Formula One? What if Mark Donohue had remained retired, focusing instead on running the team? What if Donohue had survived his crash in Austria? What if Penske Racing had continued in Formula One? where would American motorsport be today? I know that personally, my life would look much different. I distinctly remember my first ever writing assignment at school. We were tasked with writing an essay on a deceased person. And I thought and I asked my parents for advice, and then I thought some more before I ultimately decided to write that essay on Mark Donohue. I was just a kid at the time, maybe first grade, but Donohue's story really stuck with me. The quiet, humble engineer who helped craft Penske Racing into a dominant force in all kinds of motorsport around the world. Decades have passed, and I still haven't stopped thinking about Donohue and his contributions to racing, and I know I'm not the only one. When Penske returned to America, its successes kept coming. Roger Penske now owns IndyCar and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He's notched more victories at the Indy 500 as a team owner than anyone else. His NASCAR team is strong, and he's practically unstoppable at major endurance races in America. Team Penske is an institution in American motorsport unlike anything else. It's just hard not to wonder where the team would be today if Mark Donohue had been around to guide it to greater heights. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Deadly Passions, Terrible Joys. In the next one, we are going to unfurl the tragic life of Jochen Rindt, Formula One's only posthumous world champion, in order to better understand the dangers unique to the sport's third decade of competition, and to introduce the genesis of the modern racing driver. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show, give it a rating, and leave a review. And if you're hungry for more, don't forget to check out the DPTJ Substack, where I'm digging into contemporary motorsport news, breaking down the barriers of becoming a racing journalist, and digging out some of the wildest fun facts from the motorsport history that you may not have known. Finally, if you have any further questions, sponsorship opportunities, or you just want to reach out to say hello, I have an email for that, deadlypassionsterriblejoys@gmail.com. Finally, we're ending with La Source, the segment named after the iconic turn at Spa-Francorchamps that serves as my bibliography for each episode. It's important to me to be able to cite regularly and accurately, so I'm giving a shout out to some of the most influential sources at the end of each show. You can also find my full list of sources in the episode description. This week I've referred to plenty of goodies, including The Unfair Advantage by Mark Donohue, but I also have to give a massive shout out to none other than John Watson for taking the time to speak with me in depth about his experiences at Penske Racing and his incredible victory in Austria in 1976. It was a wonderful conversation, one I'm very, truly glad to have had. Thank you all for listening to Deadly Passions, Terrible Joys. I'll see you next time.